haven't flat ironed my hair, like fully flat ironed it in a really long time, and I don't know how I feel about it. But that's not why we're here. Actually, we are here today because we are finally going to be talking about my giant rainbow eyeshadow palettes. This is actually going to be 3 videos because there's a lot of information to cover, because I have depotted and or repanned every single eyeshadow I have ever owned. And so there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack, there's a lot to go through, and we're gonna talk about all of it. The first video is going to be my depotting journey. When I started, why I started, how I got like a little bit of 5 minutes of fame out of it, and all of that good stuff. Then the second video is going to be about repanning. Why I decided to take all of my rectangle shadows and my large pan eyeshadows and repress them into 27mm pans so that they can all be in one place. Then the final video is actually just going to be a tour of my giant palettes and a little bit on where this is going in the future. I wanted to make these videos because these big palettes, and as they grow in the future, is going to be the linchpin of my channel. How everything kind of swivels and revolves around how I go about doing makeup in general, but specifically here on YouTube. And so we're gonna talk about it. This video today is just gonna be about my depotting journey. My original depot, kind of what happened in the wake of that, and what I've learned from depotting my eyeshadows. I have been doing makeup in general for 5 or 6 years, and as I'm sure you have noticed if you are at all on YouTube, eyeshadow palettes have been a really big thing in that time. I was about 3 years in, so 2 years ago, when I had accumulated about 35, 36 eyeshadow palettes just across my collection. And I was finding that they were taking up a crap ton of space. I live in a major metropolitan city. I live in Philadelphia. Space is a premium, right? I don't live in a house in the suburbs. I live in a row house in a townhouse in a major metro area. There's only so much space that I have, and expanding space is not really an option. This was especially true where I was living at the time, which was a little 1,000 square foot apartment that I was sharing with myself and my 2 partners. I knew that I wanted to keep growing my collection. I love eyeshadow, I still love eyeshadow, but I was just finding that it took up so much space and I was forgetting things. I very distinctly remember doing a look of some kind and saying to myself, I really wish I had a cool toned purple matte for this look. And I didn't have one, so I just kept going. And then the very next day, I pulled out the Juvia's Place Zulu palette, opened it up, and there's a cool tone purple staring me in the face. And so, like, trying to remember where everything was, trying to remember what I had, just wasn't working out. And I felt as I was growing in my artistry that being limited by a palette was really stifling, and I really wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. So I did a bunch of research. I did a lot of deep diving on blogs and on Reddit to see how one could go about fixing this issue. And I did a lot of research on like depotter's regret and why people regret it, all of that stuff, and then ultimately decided it was the right thing for me to do. And if you know anything about me, I don't do anything halfway. I do it all the way, or I don't do it at all. So my initial depot was a 20-hour long project. It cost me $100 because I had to get little palettes and stuff. And I depotted every single eyeshadow palette I owned, which consisted of over 200 eyeshadows. And I will insert a picture here of what that first depot looked like. This was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. Depotting can be very tricky, particularly when you're new to it. If you are looking for depotting tutorials, I will leave a couple of good ones down below, and then as my channel grows, I'm sure I will do ones as well. But I finally got it all figured out, and like any good internet nerd, I put it on Reddit. And it's probably the best single post I've ever had. I had a lot of really good conversations with people in the comments. I really enjoyed it. And then in my DMs on Reddit, I was actually approached by a writer for Allure, and she wanted to do a little interview with me and talk about my depotting project, which was super exciting. So if you ever saw those articles, I'll kind of spread them out down here about that girl who depotted all of her eyeshadows. That's me. And it was really cool because I have been active in other realms on the internet. I did politics for a little while. I did political blogging, and I've had projects of mine blow up in popularity before, but it was never like universally positive. A lot of the times when stuff that I had done blew up, it was because someone famous hated it, and it's part of being a woman with opinions on the internet. It's just the way that it goes. But this was really nice because it was a creative project that I had worked really hard on, and for the most part, people were really excited about it. And Allure did the article, Pop Sugar picked it up, I think Revelist did something on it as well, and Teen Vogue also picked it up as in addition to that. So it was a really cool like 15 minutes of fame for me. I have all of those articles saved. It is such a positive memory. So after that initial depot, I have been depotting all of my eyeshadows since then. I have been depotting consistently for 2 years, and I have no regrets. There are pros and cons to depotting, just like there are pros and cons to everything. I'm not going to cover them here, but I will cover them at some point because I am hoping to create a depotter's guide here on my channel. So we'll talk about it eventually. But depotting my shadows, getting them out of palettes, out of individual palettes and into essentially a single workflow, a single workspace, was really good for me. In addition to the fact that it saved me a lot of space. In the subsequent couple of years, I have obviously added to my collection. I have also purchased single shadows. I still bought palettes. I do really like eyeshadow palettes still, like pre-made ones. I think that it's a good way to get colors and formulas that people don't necessarily provide in singles. I have a mix of both in my palettes here. Overall, the decision to depot was the right one for me, the right one for how I approach my makeup, and like I said, I have no regrets. I know that a lot of people experience depotter regret, so much that especially on Reddit, it's like a thing that you can search for, depotter regret. And in this video, I wanted to cover a few things that people very often experience when they depot and why I don't experience regret over that. So the first one is that you kind of have to pick a palette style. And this is not something that I was aware of when I started depotting, but apparently MAC has empty palettes that you can slot your eyeshadows into. And I was watching a YouTuber who felt like she picked that style of empty palette and decided she wanted to do a Z palette style instead. I'm not sure, but I have only ever done Z palettes. Actually, I have one of my first ones here. This is one of the first empty magnetic palettes I ever bought. This is from a brand called All One. They sell on Amazon. I feel like it was 20 bucks. Right now it holds my blushes. But I always wanted something thin like this because one of my big reasons for it was to save space. What saved me from that aspect of depot or regret is the fact that I did a lot of research ahead of time and really decided what was best for me. The one thing I will say about palettes and regret with regard to palettes is that I did buy a lot of smaller palettes that ultimately I ended up getting rid of. I think that's the only all-one palette I still have. I also bought a bunch of these little double-sided magnetic palettes from an Etsy brand, I believe called Book of Shadows. I'll leave her link down below. And while these are great, I discovered that I really don't like double-sided palettes because of cross-contamination. But I don't really see those for me as reasons to regret depotting my eyeshadows as much as just a learning experience, right? When you set up processes, when you set up workflows, all that good stuff, learning what you don't like is just as important as learning what you do like. And that's how I feel about these. I have now moved to large, very large magnetic palettes. These are from Colored Rain, and I have 4 of them. They were $45 each, and that's expensive. If there is a part that I wish had been different, is that I wish I had known about companies that make magnetic palettes, like really large ones, a little earlier than I do. That said, I also think that the 2 large magnetic palettes that I'm thinking of right now, that I have ordered both of them, which is the Adept 88 palette and the Give Me Glow 88 palette, I don't think they were being made 2 years ago. I think that aspect of depotter's regret can be avoided by research, but also in kind of accepting the fact that some of the decisions you make for who you are in your workflow right now aren't gonna be as helpful as you refine that. Another reason people really experience depotter regret is because having all your eyeshadows that close together and all in one pan can be super messy. And this actually looks very nice. Hold on, let me get a different palette to show you. Let me hold this vertically. I actually agree that it can be very messy. I don't know if you can tell, but there's all sorts of powder down here. If you are just depotting, a lot of the time you won't get like all of the glue off the pan, and there'll be glue on your magnetic palette, which then catches powder that comes off. I know sometimes when you depot, you can kind of destabilize the shadow a little bit, so it will crumble some more, and that gets into your palette, gets into your other shadows, all of that stuff. Like I said, I agree that it's messy, but it's not a deal breaker for me by any stretch of the imagination, and a little regular maintenance does go a long way. We're going to cover this in more detail in a different video, but I actually am going to be moving most of my collection into a different configuration, a different set of palettes, and doing that will give me the opportunity to clean these ones, and I'm very excited about it. So yeah, it can get messy, but again, if you know that ahead of time and know to prevent it and to look out for it, I think it can be mitigated. So I have no regrets on that front either. Something that someone mentioned, and this is more if you are more of a minimalist, if you're coming here with the hope of really streamlining and minimalizing your makeup collection, is that some people have found that depotting encourages them to keep shadows that they would otherwise get rid of. And I actually can probably illustrate this pretty well. So if I have a palette that looks like this and I made it, these like dark red bronzes here at the bottom row, I I don't really use them that much, but if I got rid of them, then my palette would look weird, right? So like that's the idea. That's the piece of regret I think that comes from like a minimalist standpoint. I'm not a minimalist. I don't mind having things that I don't use a lot, so it doesn't bother me that much. And I personally get a lot of day-to-day satisfaction in seeing this color gradient. I really like seeing it. I like seeing it open on my vanity. I like knowing that it's there. So none of that bothers me either. The last, and I think probably most common thing that people who depot regret, and what causes them to regret depotting their shadows, is that they can't really combine different shadows from different palettes that are different shapes. And I experienced that as well. My solution to that is somewhat different, and some might argue way more drastic than what other people do. Most people just stop depotting. I decided to repan all of my 36mm pans and my square and rectangle pans into 26mm round pans. And that's how we have this collection that we do. I am going to talk about repanning in a different video because I think that that is a subject all on its own. But I did want to mention it because I think that people who go into depotting, they don't anticipate that sense of messiness, right? Before I repanned everything, my solution was to have a palette with the big shadows, a palette with my square and rectangle shadows, and a palette with my 26, 27mm pans, which I had different issues with that, which I'll go into with the repanning. So like that's an entirely separate video, but it's worth mentioning here as well. The last section of this, I want to take a second and kind of address questions and statements disguised as questions that I've gotten over the past couple of years when people see my depotting. And some of this comes from the original Reddit thread that I did. Some of it comes from the comments on my YouTube video where I depotted the A Juvia's Place palette. And some of it is just things that have come up randomly over the course of time. And so we're gonna talk about those two. One of the I find it very strange, but one of the most common things that people say to me is that they feel like depotting is disrespectful to the brand. And my response to that kind of like bifurcates. The first and initial response I have to that is like, bitch, they already have my money. They don't care, right? Like they are a business that is there to grow and sell product and make money. Like that's what they're there for. And that's not to say that the brand owner, the artist who designed the palette, the product designer who designed it, all of those people, that's not to say that they don't have an investment into their artistic work in that way. But I can tell you, I'm a designer. I'm a UX designer. I make websites. I do know how it feels when you turn something over to a client and they destroy it. I completely understand what that feels like, but it's also part and parcel of the job, right? It is part and parcel of creating a product that is then given to someone else in exchange for money. I don't find it to be disrespectful. Like, of the things that I feel when my client destroys the website that I made for them, disrespected is not one of them. I think that if you are a professional, whether you are the CEO of a brand or an artist doing art for a palette, or a designer or creative conceptualizing a palette, etc., you have to have a sense of professional distance from your work. And I hope and believe that the people whose stuff I've depotted do have that. However, it is something that I have been and will take into consideration with my depotting videos. I might cut this part out, but I have been going back and forth on whether or not to purchase a Glamlite paint palette just for the purpose of depotting it. On the one hand, I think it would be very helpful for people who really like the Glamlite formula, want to support the brand, but like cannot support, like do not have the infrastructure in their home to house something with packaging like that. But at the same time, I get the impression that the owner of Glamlite has a personal connection to the stuff that she makes. And I think this line in particular is very much themed around how art helped her out of her depression. So I don't want to shit on that, right? So there are some aspects that I would take into consideration, but depotting in general, I don't think is disrespectful to the brand. It's just taking what they have made that you like and making it work for you, which I think is fine because they already have your money. That little bit of jingle there was a reminder to stop and restart recording because if I talk for more than half an hour, my camera hates me. I said before that the being disrespectful to the brand is the most common comment I get, but actually it's more along the most common comment I get is more along the lines of, I can't destroy packaging, it's so good. Or like, I'm crying as you destroy this packaging. And like, okay, calm down. Here's what I will say about it. If you like packaging, if that's a thing that gets you off, you don't have to depot. Me taking apart a palette does not ruin the experience of your packaging for you. I don't have an attachment to the packaging of things. I just don't care. And there are some packaging bits that have really lovely pieces of art on them. I don't really feel the need to keep them because I can probably get a digital file of it and make a print of it if I wanted to, just for my own personal use, not to sell. For people who do really like packaging, I would say that it is just worth considering and worth asking for yourself if the joy you get from the packaging of anything is worth the space that it takes up in your life, in your makeup collection, etc. The answer to that question can be yes. It absolutely can be, and I'm not here to tell you that it shouldn't be. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I know part of what I'm trying to do on my channel is to help people maintain large collections of makeup without feeling overwhelmed. And so if you're at that point and you're considering depotting, but you feel that attachment to the packaging, that's a worthwhile question to ask yourself. And if it's not worth it, but you still will feel sad about it, that's a different process. And that's okay. The last thing that I get asked a lot, and the last thing that I will talk about before we wrap up this video, is whether or not I still buy pre-made eyeshadow palettes, and whether or not that influences what palettes I do or don't buy. I absolutely do still buy eyeshadow palettes. It's kind of hard to be into eyeshadow without buying palettes. Single shadows are definitely a thing, and I have a lot, and I'm working on building that collection, but palettes in and of themselves are valuable in that a lot of the times companies will make colors that they don't want to make as a single because the production costs are too high and put it in a palette. However, I do think it does impact how eager I am and how many palettes I buy at once, which is actually a good thing. So I have had my eye on the Pinky Rose Trilogy collection, I guess at this point for almost a year. Those bright colors are freaking gorgeous. I have the Bright Lights palette. It's beautiful, some of the best bright mattes that I own. Wonderful. But the idea of repanning 75 eyeshadows is daunting. Like, and I don't know if I would keep all 75. We'd explore the palette and then, make that decision. But that's a big reason why I haven't pulled the trigger on it yet. And I don't know when I will. It's a big factor. And I will continue to see how it impacts my workflow going forward, because honestly, repanning is only something that I've done, like I've only had to work with for about a month. I just repanned all of my square shadows at the end of June. So I'm sure I will have more information on that as time goes on. Okay, I think that's all I have to say for this mega palette video about depotting. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up or leave me a comment down below and tell me how crazy you think I am, because you're not wrong. If you like me and my flowing red hair, please do also subscribe to the channel. I upload Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for the foreseeable future. You can find me on the internet at Faces by Gina. I have an Instagram and a Facebook under those names, and I upload there every single day. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. My sun is setting, my light is changing by the second, but I'm feeling much better than I did when I started, so that's pretty great. Please think deeply about the world around you, be good to yourself, be good to others, and I will see you out there on the internet.